What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to Master Crafted. And today we are getting very, proper and very nice because we are talking about Master Crafted manners, which is how you should act at the table while you're playing your opponent. Good day to you, sir. How are you, Phil?
Good day. Pinkies out, ladies and gentlemen. We are fancy boys and girls because when we come to the table, we are nothing but proper and respectful.
Yes, this is very true, right? We are trying to make sure that when we go to the table, we are going to give our opponents a good game, and hopefully they will do the same for us, and they will give us that nice common courtesy of playing a good game of 40k. And today we're going to talk about some of the things that will help, really kind of establish the guidelines for how we think of how a game of Warhammer should be played, and some of the things we should keep in mind, not only for ourselves but to be considerate of our opponents.
Yep, absolutely. And there's some very basic things that you can do, but it doesn't mean that we're doing those things when we arrive at the table. Some of them are some prep work we need to do beforehand. Some of those things are with the tools that we use or how we prepare and our lists and how we understand the rules and all this stuff. So Lane, why don't you hit us off with the first one? What is the first thing that when we created our list, the first thing that we recommended for players to do before they got to the table?
Yeah, I think that's the big thing, right? The things you do before you get there is knowing your rules, whether that is just the core rules of the game or at least knowing, the majority of your units, what their profiles are, what their abilities are. And there's always going to be a case I frequently, usually like once or twice per game still, I'll be like, all right, let me just double check what that profile is. There's always a niche thing that you hardly ever use and you're like, I need to, refresh my memory to make sure I am playing this certain thing right. But for the most part, when we show up to the table, we want to have done, our best to have a good understanding of just the base rules. So there's other niche things. If you have to call a judge, that's totally fine. But we want to make sure we know, a majority of the rules on the most basic level. We're not getting stuck on the basics of the game. And then knowing your own rules, how your army works. This is the most important thing before we show up to the table.
Yeah. So those things are like the weapon skill, the ballistic skill, your base movement, right? Does this unit have advance in charge, fall back in charge, fights first? All of those game-breaking mechanics that are significant for a lot of armies, you should know, right? The number of attacks, the number of shots, the strength, the damage, the AP, right? It sounds like we're saying a lot. And you're right, it is. 40k is a data-dense game. There's a lot of information in here. But if you as a player aren't doing what you need to do prior to the game, whether it's a tournament game or it's, your one game a month that you're getting ready to play, I promise you, it's a lot more fun if you don't have to spend time looking up your rules. You can actually play the game versus looking at your codex or looking at your phone, trying to figure out like how many attacks this one unit has. And you can be prepared a lot of different ways. Even if you play one game a month, maybe it's refreshing and rereading your codex or your army list and just going through. And I've done it before. I like quiz myself where I'm like, okay, remember like my Indominus brick. There is so many different profiles in that brick. It is not fair. And I would not be able to finish a game if I had to look up every time I went to use those profiles. I have to have those memorized because I need to be able to shoot with those profiles quickly. And you could do the same thing. You could quiz yourself. You could write little flashcards. You could do whatever you need to do. But I promise you, the game gets a lot better and more fun if you're not spending your 3 hours looking up your rules.
Yes, yeah. Spending 20 minutes of your game time looking at your phone to know what you need to be rolling is drastically going to hurt how much time you actually have to accomplish the things in your game that you need to make it to round 5 and get, the end result you're hoping for. Yeah, I think that's a good thing. Anything else that comes to mind before we get to the table, Phil? Or are we ready to move on to at the table etiquette?
Before we get to the table, this is just a personal preference of mine. I've seen a lot of different players have different types of dice. And for me, etiquette wise, I don't care if you have like dice that you've collected from all the people you've played or whatever the case is, but there's 2 requirements I have. One, they are big enough and they contrast enough that I can see, like your opponent can see. I should see like a high contrast die, as in a dark color and light pips, or a light color and dark pips, right? And then I should only ever see the symbol on the 6. You should never have die that have like different symbols and the symbol is on the 1 or the 6. So if you have a big pool of dice, I would just sort through them. So you're not that person that comes forward and it's like, well, these couple die have symbols on the 1. No, that's not how this works. You should do your best to make sure they all are the same, and then they all have good contrast, and then they're just not too small. I understand there's some armies that roll a lot of dice. I would much rather you roll twice with reasonably sized dice that I can see versus rolling tiny dice that, my eyesight isn't bad, but it's hard to look quickly across the table and try to ascertain what it is that you rolled. And I want to be as apparent with my opponent as possible. So what I bring to the table is super important.
Yes, I agree 100%. While we're on dice, we might as well just, talk about all of the dice etiquette. The other thing, try to always roll in plain view, right? Whether it is in your tray or is, on the table. Don't be rolling right behind a building that they can't really see through. You want to try to make sure that they can verify what you are rolling, and never be offended, right? If you are rolling in your opponent, like if you're rolling your tray and they're like, hey, I just can't see that very well, can you please move that here or something, you should want to do that, right? You are trying to have a fair and honest game with your opponent, and you should not ever feel like you can't ask your opponent that, right? Like I roll in a tray that's on a cart. It's off the side of the table. If I ever have anybody say, hey man, I can't see, I'd really want you to roll in front of me, I will happily do it. It's just, for me, I don't want to be bending over a table. I'm a relatively tall dude. I'm going to roll in my tray. And as long as you can verify and you're fine with it, we're good. Is if you want me to move the table, I will.
Yeah, absolutely fair. And then just on top of that, right, when we talk about rolling in front of individuals, we want to have the standard when we're rolling dice. So, for example, and I always say this at the beginning of the game, if my opponent's rolling in the box, if I say, hey, what's your standard for rolling in the box? The majority of my opponents will say, hey, I always roll in the box. If it lands outside the box, I will re-roll it inside the box, no matter what. It's like, great, fantastic. I like rolling on the table, and I want to roll in front of you. If the dice is cocked in any way, I will re-roll it, no matter what. So it doesn't matter if I roll a double 6 charge and it's cocked, I will re-roll those dice. And that's important. And you need to verbalize that at the beginning of the game, because that is proper etiquette for your opponent, because you need to verbalize those standards as much as possible so you and your opponent are on the same page, so there's no bad feelings as the game goes on. Because your opponent shouldn't, if your opponent says, hey man, that dice is cocked, you shouldn't get upset because I said at the beginning of the game, I will re-roll every cocked die, or I will always roll in the box. So even if it rolls outside the box and it was a 6 and I needed a 6 for whatever, it doesn't matter. That's the standard. I'm going to re-roll it in the box, and that's proper etiquette.
Yes, I agree. And I think, there's some people, you can still do whatever you want. I prefer Phil's way. If it is remotely cocked in any way, if it's sitting half on an objective, half on a terrain profile, it doesn't matter if it's mostly sitting some way and it looks like it would have fallen. I think it is still best practice. Anytime anything is relatively cocked, just pick it up and re-roll it. I think you're far less likely to have somebody be like, well, that one was borderline and you didn't re-roll it, but this was, people will just be a lot more nitpicky in their judgments of you as well. So just clear yourself of all of that and say, if it is remotely cocked at all, I will re-roll it. Because if you're saying, well, I'll put a dice on it, and if it doesn't fall off, I'll count it, you could have just picked up the damn dice and re-rolled it already. What are you doing? I don't understand that method. I'm sorry, but it doesn't make any sense. Pick up the damn dice and re-roll it.
Yep. Or just roll it in a box, right? If that's what you care about and that's what you need to do, just roll it in a box.
The last thing for dice, at least that I have, is make sure you declare what you're rolling. Yeah. So the last thing I have that I would bring up about dice.
I'm still here.
Barely. Same. All right. So the last thing I would bring up about rolling dice is that I would always say, try to make sure you declare what you're rolling before you start the roll. Sometimes I'll like mid-roll, as it's, leaving the hand is fine and stuff, but try to make sure, as you're going through a bunch of different profiles, right, that your opponent at least knows what you're rolling, especially before they make any saves or anything like that. Let them know what they're going to be dealing with, especially before you do any activations, right? You need to be declaring where your shots are going as it is.
Yes, absolutely. Each one of those things makes a difference. And that part, and we're going to call it verbalizing, is super important as we just play the game. So like verbalizing the dice I'm rolling, verbalizing what units are shooting, verbalizing the things that I'm doing. 40k is believe it or not, it's a teamwork based game. Me and my opponent, or my opponent and I, are working together to play this game. It will not work if my opponent is just sitting there being uninteractive with me while I do these things, because then it's going to put them in a bad position where I'm going to be doing things and they're not necessarily paying attention or engaging, and they're going to want to do something and they don't get it or they don't get to. So, like, for example, if I'm moving a unit, I'm telling to my opponent, hey, opponent, I'm moving this unit 12 inches. I'm measuring to see I if you can get within 9. I'm seeing this as you cannot get within 9, right? Like, there's no deep strike area for that. My opponent should also be engaged with me and say, yep, I agree, I can't get within 9. It's not a gotcha moment. It's not a tactical move to be like, actually, I can get within 9, or I can get outside of 9 and there is space for me here, and I got you, but I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to wait till it's my turn to rapid ingress. That's not how this works. What should be happening is your opponent either verifies and says, yes, you can, yes, that is possible, or, hey, I have my 9-inch gauge right here. I can see I can fit a unit here. I'm telling you right now, I can fit a unit here. So either you advance to go further, or you put another unit there, or whatever the case is. That is not the way I've ever condoned someone winning games. And if you can look me in the eye and say, oh, but then how are you supposed to win games? That you're wrong. I'm sorry. Like, it's just not the way it is. I would like to think I'm a relatively competent competitive player. I've won a lot of games at 40k at some very high events against some very good players, and not once have I ever had to like hide something from my opponent to win a game. Like, that has never been the case and never will be the case, because that is not how 40k works. I'm going to put you in a position where you don't have a choice, right? Like, I'm just telling you right now, you don't have enough movement to get there. I'm going to be able to rapid ingress on the other side. And my opponent's going to be like, you're right. There's nothing I can do. I was like, yes, I know. And that's okay, because that's a better way of dealing with it than, your opponent thinking that they have you screened out or whatever the case is. And you're like, haha, I got you. Even though you said it and verbalized it and did those things, I still got you.
Yeah. Yep. And that is why, establishing intent, right? That's why we're doing all this verbalizing. It's going to just be a better game for you and your opponent if you both have a true understanding of the board state. It's going to be, if I move here, it's going to be, a 7-inch charge for that unit if they use their base move, right? You're always trying to, really just establish things beforehand, and it'll just make the game a lot easier, right? They're not going to say, well, because now they'll have that information on their turn. It's a courtesy for them and for you, because you'll know, okay, I know the risk I'm taking, and I've also established that even if their move is a little sloppy, we have measured it and agreed on it, that it is this, this measurement for a charge, right? And then during your turn, as they're moving and all this other stuff, they're not trying to think, okay, well, I don't know how far that charge is going to be. It looks like it could be long. They know it. They can start making their game plan. You will have faster, more, speedy games where you can get to the finish if you're just establishing intent. You aren't taking, because in your movement, you're establishing the rules for their movement phase on their turn, and vice versa. So as you're going through and just using all of this intent, your games are going to go even faster, because you both know what is or isn't possible based on, the previous turn. And so it makes the game a lot quicker and easier both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes sense, right? Like, I want to play faster games of 40k because that means I get to play more games of 40k. And I have such great friends in this community, and I have such great friends all over the place, that I'm just thinking to myself, like, I just want to play as many games of 40k with my friends. And every game matters to me, and I'm not speeding through them, but I care about the game, and I want it to go well, and I want it to be effective, and I want to get to the end of it. I want to get to turn 5. I want to see this game end. And I don't want it to end early just because we don't have enough time. So, like, for me and my opponent, that's what's helpful. That's what's beneficial. And I think that's really great on intent. Let's move on to the next thing, Lane. What's up next?
Yeah, so the next thing we have is kind of a split thing, like answering your opponent's questions honestly, and then also, honestly telling them about your traps. So it's kind of a two-parter, but it's about just being, an honest player. If somebody asks you, hey, like, is that actually good at overwatching me? You don't have to say, I am 100% gonna overwatch you. You can. If it's a terrible move and you're like, for the love of God, please do not move there, right? You should be forthcoming, right? You are not trying to ever feels bad your opponent, right? If they say, hey, if I move out there, like, will that just pick me up? You should be like, yes, do not do that. And if they're about to do that, you should tell them beforehand. It is a trap. right? And even we'll say, I'll take it a step further, talk a little bit about takebacks, which will come up in a minute. But while we're on it, right, if your opponent moves out and they didn't ask you and you didn't remember in time, allow them to take their move back. Do not overwatch them and be like, well, you should have asked me if it was a good overwatch, right? Like, that's still not being an honest player, right? Just because they got to that move and they might have, like, you should be, having a good game of 40k and just trying to always operate with good faith both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the thing that you need to put in the back of your head is if your opponent had the information, would they have made that decision? There's no hidden information in Warhammer 40k 10th edition. There isn't. You should know exactly what your opponent can do. And when I went down to Arizona this week, I was talking to players down there and I was talking to Ryan, and we had some really great conversations about, like, hey, what am I supposed to do if I don't know every one of my opponent's rules? And I'm like, you can't. There are very few players, or if any at all, that have a full understanding of the entire state of Warhammer 40k. I would even hazard a guess that John Lennon, Michael Mann, and kind of like Adam, like all those guys that play on all these great teams, Liam VSL, like I know they know their army inside and out, but I guarantee you that they don't know every intricate nature of your opponent's army. And that's okay, because the expectation, the social contract between you and I as a player is you understand your rules and I understand my rules, and you can verbalize what your rules are so I can understand them. So at no point should there be hidden information. At no point there should be a gotcha. At no point should there be a moment of like, oh, if I knew that that unit could do that, I wouldn't have done this. And you could be the dick and say, well, you did it and too bad, sucks to suck. Like, no, absolutely not. It should be, I'm sorry, I didn't explain properly what that rule did, right? I didn't explain that I battle shocked you at the beginning of the fight phase, which would prevent you from flipping this objective, which was the whole point of you doing this, right? Like, I did not explain that. The audacity that you would have to like allow that to happen in your game would frustrate me to no end, because that is not the way 40k is meant to be played, because it is unreasonable to ask your opponent to know everything about your army. The onus is on me to explain to you everything in my army. Does that mean like I'm going to explain everything at the beginning of the game and expect you to remember? No. But I'm going to remind you before you do something. I'm going to say, hey, if you move there, like this unit, Overwatch is nasty. Hey, don't forget, I can do army-wide lethals, sustains. Like all my guns pretty much have lethal. My heavy bolters are flat damage 3. And I'll repeat that multiple times in a game, because at no point do I want you to make a decision uninformed. Yeah, it blows my mind. And if you say you can't win a game without doing that, the rules aren't the issue. You doing that is not the issue. You are losing games because you are making poor decisions, because I can confidently say that I give my opponents as much information as I possibly can, and I win a lot of games of 40k.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree 100%. And if you're not doing those things, you're just going to leave, a really bad taste in somebody's mouth. I had that happen to me at a tournament this last spring, back when Yanari was just running rampant and stuff. I activated a tank and I was like, I'll just throw these stubbers into that unit over there. It doesn't matter. It's not going to kill the incarn and stuff. And I explained my whole game plan around how I need to kill that incarn without killing anything else. And I'm just like, I'm going to throw these stubbers into that unit. It's fine. The stubbers actually popped off and killed like 3 little Eldar. And after that activation, he's like, oh, I'm going to move. And I'm like, I just told you what my plan was. And I really wasn't planning to there was another full unit just right next to it. Right. I think it was even less. There's like 2 Eldar there. There was no reason to put it there at all. Right. And I was like, it's up to you. Right. It's still on me a little. Like, I'm not going to take it off of me. We've talked about the rule or whatever. But like, I was like, it's up to you. Either you can take it and you'll move it, even though we just talked about it, but like you should have reminded me, do not put those in there. We had a great game. It's still a cool guy, but it just left a bad taste in both our mouths after that game because of not really honoring, kind of what the intent of that, phase was supposed to be.
Now, will we make mistakes in games? Will we deprioritize or any of those things? Absolutely. But once again, like, it's unreasonable to think that you need to gotcha someone to win a game. it's unreasonable and it hurts a little bit every time it happens. And I would love to say that it's never going to happen to you, or Lane and I again. But even like at the top tables, when it's close, when they're tight games and both players want to win, there are times where it's just like, one player may play by intent and the other one like doesn't do it in the same way. And that's tough. It's really tough. So yeah, it happens, but you have to be in control of the things that you can control, and I can control myself and the way I treat other players, and that's super important to me and Lane, and it's why it's like when we talk about playing competitive games at 40k, it is like the underlying nature of how we play. It's how Denver 40k Fight Club plays. Like we say it at every one of our tournaments, you will play by intent. Like you will do these things. If you are purposely hiding information, you will not be invited back to these tournaments, because that's not the way we play 40k. It's the same at Thundercluckers down in the Springs. It's same for League of Brotan up in Wyoming. And we have some of the best players in the countries. It has nothing like we are not playing worse or we lose more games because we do this. No, we win games of 40k. It's what we do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I do think one of the things too, right, is if you're trying to establish those expectations of the game, right? We talk a lot about like give take backs, be forgiving and stuff. But if your opponent is not going to do that, right, you don't need to be a dick back to them. You're just not going to give them take backs, right? You need to at least protect yourselves. Don't just let your opponent walk all over you, right? Like I always go into every game being fairly, forgiving. Oh yeah, you wouldn't do that 100% and stuff. But if they're going to start off by being like, oh no, you move there, you're stuck, this is happening, then they get no quarter. I will not correct them. I'll still warn them. I'll give them, hey, like that's a decent Overwatch, this or that. If they decide to do something and then realize it was a mistake, that is on them. They have lost their good faith in that game.
Yeah. Yeah. And like we said, it's a social contract and people can break that contract, which is disappointing for a hobby that we all really enjoy.
Yeah. Let's see. What else do we got here? Touching your opponent's models. That's another one, right? A lot of people spend a lot of time painting their models very, very nicely. I'm not one of them. Throw my guardsmen at me. I don't care. But at least ask, right? Have the courtesy to be like, hey, do you mind if I just pick these up and give them to you across the table? Save you walking around or trying to really reach across, and just save some time. And pick them up for them, hand them to them nicely. That's another big one. What else do we got, Phil?
Well, in terms of just like handling people's stuff, don't touch your opponent's dice. If you want to roll their dice, that is something actually I'm perfectly okay with. If you want to roll my dice, that's perfectly fine. If I ask to roll your dice, that should be perfectly fine. Do not get uncomfortable with someone asking to roll your dice. I know I've had plenty of games where people are like, "Damn, Phil, your dice are rolling hot. Like, let me roll those dice." I'm like, sure, absolutely. Has no effect on me because, the game should be balanced in that way. I actually am of the belief that it should be one pool of dice for a table, right? Like you and I should come together and we put down our one pool of dice and those are the only dice we use. But if your opponent asks you to use your dice, that should be no issues. They should ask, absolutely, but I don't think anyone should ever have a problem with that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think everybody has their own preferences, and you can be a little superstitious, but try to be only just a little stitious. It's not that big a deal. They're just dice. They are random. Yeah. I think that's a great point. The other thing too is, if you're playing somebody, don't tell them how they should be playing their army. Like if they ask for advice, sure, that's one thing. Say, yeah, like this is how my army works, is maybe how you could deal with me, especially in a game where like maybe it is a game that you've already kind of secured the win, and they're like, hey man, I'd just like to learn, how do I actually deal with this? Tell them, right? Like, is it that important for you to, rack up a couple extra battle points? Maybe it is if your TOs are behind the times and haven't switched over to opponent game win percentage, but that's a whole nother thing. In general, though, you shouldn't be saying, oh yeah, I'm going to move here, so that means you have to do this and this and this, right? Like, you can have a guess, but like you shouldn't be telling your opponent how to play their game at all points, right? Like let them play their game. If they ask for advice, give it to them, but you don't need to be overbearing with it, telling them their rules and stuff. Like they know their rules. You don't need to be just the whole time talking to your opponent. That's another thing. If it's their turn, shut up and let them think. Let them play. If they ask you stuff, tell them. Otherwise, just sit there and think of your next turn. You do not need to be talking the whole time unless they kind of ask you, or like maybe you have some rapport with that person. That's fine. But in general, just kind of tone it down. It's their turn.
Yeah. No, absolutely fair. No, I like that a lot. All right, Lane, what's the next one?
I think the last one I have is just be precise with your movement. If you're going to try to check something or move models, put dice down around it. Make sure that, if you're unsure where you are actually going, that you know where you did start definitively. Sloppy movement is one of the things that does bug me personally from time to time. Just like people can be like, well, I'm going to go here and back. And then it's just like, man, that unit is not remotely where it started when you went the entire other direction, right?
Yeah.
Like we need to try to be consistent, measure first and just put a dice down on where you could go before you pick up any models potentially. Just avoid, really messing with your movement and be very precise. That's another reason why, especially playing any players who are melee heavy, I always am like, this is going to be your charge. I will tell you what your charge is. I will even put dice down if I really feel like that's necessary with certain players. I will make sure we know what your charge needs to be in case there is sloppy movement. We will agree on it beforehand.
Yeah. Yeah, which is huge. Absolutely. I had an instance this weekend where my opponent, at no fault of his own, he rolled a charge. He made it. He rolled a 12. So we moved all the models in. We got within range. And I said, hey, man, like, I can heroic here. It doesn't like you roll the 12, you roll the max distance. If you are trying to stay as far away from me as possible on either side, it doesn't matter. I can get within 6, which means I can heroic with these Terminators. And he goes, well, I'm going to pay CP and I'm going to re-roll it. I re-roll the successful charge. And he re-rolled and he re-rolled a 6. And I said, hey, man, at the beginning of this, you said you needed a 7-inch charge. But because we had already moved the models and he had marked where they were originally, and that wasn't something that was checked, we got into what was an unsatisfactory position because it's like he really wanted to obviously not be within heroic range, but it's either he passed and he was, he rolled a 12 and he got within range, or he re-rolled the charge and got a 6, and I was positive that he needed a 7. But because we didn't mark those things, we put ourselves in a position where it was just it was not good, right? Because if we had just marked it and we had done those things properly, he would have been able to go back and actually accurately shown those things, and no one would have left with bad feelings about that specific instance, especially in those situations where heroics are involved, or like interrupts are involved, or pile-ins, or whatever the case is. There's a lot of ways you could do it. Lane said dice. Absolutely, you can mark them. I carry around additional bases like 32 mils, 40 mils, whatever the army size is, and I will use them to mark out where that unit can go. That way I can actually see it on the board, versus trying to do something where I'm like, hey, I actually physically moving this unit. And there's a lot of different tools you can use, dice, additional bases, whatever the case is, all of those can be beneficial.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, Phil, any other things that you have for this?
No, I think that's good. We talked about this a lot, and I will continue to talk about it because at the end of the day, the strategy, the tips and tricks that Lane and I give you when we talk about our games and all these tournaments, I'll be honest, none of that matters if I walk up to the table and every time I play a game, it's miserable because, me and my opponent don't have the good mastercrafted manners that should be for every single player. Because I love this game. It is so fun and it's so engaging, and I love how much it makes me think. But if I got to the table and every time I played a game I was completely miserable, like, I would stop playing this game. And it's a community that makes it so good. Hopefully you've learned something. Hopefully you realize that if you're doing one of these things, you change and it helps you become a better player and your community gets better. And, we can meet again on the tabletop and play some great games of 40K.
Yep. And another thing too, I want to say is just don't, this is a good guideline and stuff. We're all, even Phil and I, we're going to fall short of this at times, but we're always trying to be this image of a player. We're always working on, trying to make sure we are living up to this expectation. You might tilt sometimes, it's going to happen. You're going to get some dice rolls, that might kind of, give you a bad taste in your mouth and make you not the best player to play against for a bit, but it's about, trying to recover quickly, being a good, player to play against, and really just, working on these things, even some of those base ones at the beginning, right? Knowing your core rules and stuff. The more you know those, the better you're going to be at some of these other ones of telling your opponent, hey, that's a terrible idea. I've seen this before. You don't want to do that, right? It just takes experience and time and reps to really be able to do all of these very, very well. And you're still going to fall short every now and then. So, don't be too hard on yourself. Don't be too hard on your opponents. Don't judge someone forever if they, do something, that you say isn't, up to mastercrafted manners standard. But just always be trying to work towards holding up the standard yourself.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to end it, I think.
Thank you to everybody who has already liked and subscribed. Please do so if you haven't already, and please join us on our Discord. And do not forget that victory isn't given, it is forged, and it's forged right here on Mastercrafted. We will see you all next time.
See you guys.